My wife was lying in the coffin, and I stood there holding her favorite lilies, and I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. Everyone was looking at me, a grieving widower who had lost everything. But then he appeared, a man in a dark coat, with eyes that drilled into my soul. His words, spoken in a whisper, broke the silence of the funeral, making my heart stop. I dropped the flowers and ran, not looking back, because the truth he brought threatened to ruin not only my day, but my entire life. Who was he? And why was I afraid to find out? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The lilies trembled in my hands, their petals soft as whispers, but they felt like stones. My wife, Laura, lay in the coffin before me, her face hidden by the polished oak. I stood alone at the front of the church, the weight of 100 eyes pressing into my back. The air was thick with waxen grief, and the pastor's voice droned, "A hymn Laura loved, Amazing Grace." It clawed at my chest, each note tightening the knot in my throat. I couldn't breathe. The lilies slipped from my fingers, scattering across the floor like broken promises. Petals clung to my shoes, stark white against the black leather. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but I didn't care. I couldn't stand there, pretending to be the grieving widower they expected. The church was cold, its stone walls swallowing the warmth of June. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting jagged patches of red and blue across the coffin. It looked like a child's watercolor, smeared and chaotic. I noticed everything: the creak of the pews, the faint tremor in old Mrs. Green's hands as she clutched her handkerchief, the way Pastor James's voice cracked on the high notes. My eyes drifted to the coffin again, but I couldn't look at Laura. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The scent of candles stung my nose, mixing with the musty smell of old hymnals. I wanted to run, to tear through the heavy oak doors and never look back. But I stood frozen, pinned by the weight of their stares. Someone was watching me. Not with pity, but with purpose. I felt it, a prickle at the base of my neck. My gaze darted to the back of the church, where a man stood near the doors. Tall, with silver hair peeking from beneath a dark fedora, he wore a coat too heavy for summer. His eyes locked on mine, sharp and unyielding, like he could see through me. I didn't know him. I'd have remembered that face, those eyes. He held something in his pocket, his hand curled tightly around it. My pulse quickened. Who was he? Why was he here? Before I could move, he stepped back, melting into the shadows of the vestibule. The doors didn't creak. He was just gone. Mrs. Green shuffled toward me, her perfume sharp and floral. "Henry, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice brittle. She was a light. Her words felt rehearsed, like lines from a script. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "She loved these hymns," she added, glancing at the scattered lilies. Her eyes lingered too long, searching for something I didn't want to give. "Thank you, Mary," I managed, my voice hoarse. She patted my arm and retreated, her heels clicking on the stone floor. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want anyone's. My mind drifted to Laura. This church, it was her choice for our wedding. I could still see her, 20 years ago, in that white dress, her smile bright but her eyes distant. I'd thought it was nerves. Now, I wondered. When had she started slipping away? When had I stopped noticing? The hymn swelled, and I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms. I should have asked her. I should have fought harder. The thought choked me, heavy as the air in this place. A soft creak broke my reverie, the doors. My head snapped up, expecting the stranger. But no one was there. Just the echo of wood settling, or maybe my imagination. I scanned the crowd again. Faces blurred together, neighbors, colleagues, people who thought they knew Laura. Did they? Did I? My eyes caught a flicker of movement near the side pews. There he was, closer now, half hidden by a pillar. The man in the coat. His gaze pinned me, cold and knowing, like he held a secret I wasn't ready to hear. My heart thudded, loud enough to drown out the hymn. I took a step toward him, my shoe crushing a lily petal. The crowd shifted, mourners rising to sing, blocking my path. I pushed forward, desperate to reach him, to demand answers. But the doors creaked again, louder this time, and I froze. Something told me that whatever lay beyond them would change everything. The pew was hard beneath me, its wood digging into my thighs, but I barely noticed. My mind was elsewhere, years away, in the house Laura and I had made ours. The church's hymn faded, replaced by the memory of a warm September evening, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and honeysuckle. We'd just bought the place, a crumbling colonial in Connecticut, its clapboard siding peeling like old skin. Laura fell in love with the garden, wild and overgrown, a tangle of roses and weeds. She'd kneel there for hours, her hands buried in the soil, coaxing life from chaos. I'd watch her from the porch, a beer in hand, thinking we'd finally found our start. Her laughter was rare back then, but when it came, it was bright, like sunlight breaking through clouds. I lived for those moments. I didn't know how fleeting they'd be. The house creaked at night, its stairs groaning under our steps. It smelled of old wood and wax, a scent that clung to everything. Laura filled it with her touch, curtains she sewed herself, books stacked on every surface. I can still see her in the kitchen, humming as she stirred soup, her hair catching the light. We were happy, weren't we? I thought so. But there were signs, even then. She'd pause sometimes, staring at the clock on the mantel, its tick loud in the quiet. I'd ask what was wrong, and she'd smile, say it was nothing. I believed her. I wanted to. Eric's birth changed everything. I remember the hospital, sterile and cold, Laura cradling him in her arms. He was so small, his fingers curling around hers. I stood by the bed, afraid to touch them, afraid I'd break something perfect. Laura looked at him with a love I couldn't match, and I felt outside. Like I was watching a story I didn't belong to. We brought him home, and the house felt alive. Nights on the porch became our ritual, Eric asleep upstairs, crickets singing in the dark. Laura would rock in the wicker chair, her eyes on the stars, but sometimes she'd go quiet, her gaze fixed on that damn clock. I'd fill the silence with talk, work, the weather, anything. She'd nod, but she wasn't there. Not really. One evening, I found her in the garden, clipping roses. "Let me help," I said, reaching for the shears. Her hand shot out, stopping me. "Don't touch it, Henry," she snapped, her voice sharp as the thorns. I froze, stung. She laughed then, quick and forced, like she'd caught herself. "It's my mess," she said, softer. "I'll handle it." I nodded, backing off, but the air felt heavier. Why did it matter so much? I didn't ask. I never did. I should've. Back in the church, a cough pulled me from the memory. My hands were clenched, nails digging into my palms. I'd been staring at the lilies, still scattered on the floor. Why had I let her keep so much to herself? Those nights she'd lock herself in her study, writing letters she never sent. I'd see the envelopes, no address, just her tight script. I never read them. I told myself it was respect, but it was fear. Fear of what I'd find. A creak of footsteps snapped me upright. Someone was close, too close. I turned, expecting the stranger, but it was Pastor James, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "You holding up, Henry?" he asked, his eyes soft with pity. I shrugged him off, muttering something vague. I didn't need his kindness. I needed answers. My gaze drifted to the clock above the altar. Stopped. Its hands frozen at 3:10. Time had slipped away from me, just like Laura. A murmur rippled through the crowd, too low to catch. Was it her name? No, something else, familiar, but out of reach. My chest tightened. I needed air. Pushing past the pews, I stumbled toward the doors, the lilies crunching underfoot. Outside, the June heat hit me, thick and damp. I scanned the churchyard. Half expecting to see him, the man in the coat. Nothing. Just trees swaying in the breeze. But there, by the oaks, a shadow moved. My breath caught. Was it him? I took a step, then another, the grass soft under my shoes. The shadow stilled, waiting. The air outside the church was heavy, laced with the scent of rain and cut grass. I stood on the steps, my tie loose, my hands shaking. The crowd's murmurs faded behind the oak doors, but my mind was elsewhere, dragged back to the years when Laura and I became strangers. I could still see her in the garden, that last summer, tearing at weeds with a fury I didn't understand. The sun was sinking, painting the sky bruise purple, and the air smelled of earth and sweat. Her hands were smeared with dirt, her eyes dark, like she was fighting something bigger than the garden. I'd watched from the porch, a glass of water in hand, wanting to ask what was wrong. I didn't. I never did. Our house had grown quiet by then. The kitchen table sat empty most nights, Laura's chair pushed in, her plate untouched. She'd started driving to Mary Green's place, sometimes staying late. Book club, she'd say, her voice flat. I nodded, pretending it made sense. But the books on her shelf gathered dust, their spines uncracked. I'd sit in the living room, the TV flickering, waiting for her car to crunch the gravel drive. When had we stopped talking? When had I let her drift so far? Eric was gone by then, living in Boston, his calls rare and clipped. I'm fine, Dad, he'd say, his voice sharp with distance. I'd hear traffic in the background, feel the miles between us. He didn't ask about Laura. I didn't tell him she was slipping away. One night, I found her in the kitchen, staring at a mug of tea gone cold. Why all the trips to Mary's? I asked, my voice softer than I felt. She didn't look up. You don't need to know everything, Henry, she said, her words like a slammed door. I waited for her to soften, to laugh it off like she used to. She didn't. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until I turned and left. I should have pushed. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I let the wall between us grow, brick by brick. I thought about the letter I'd found, tucked in her desk drawer. No address, just her handwriting, tight and hurried. I'd held it, my fingers trembling, but I didn't open it. What was I afraid of? That she was leaving? That she already had, in every way that mattered? The memory stung, sharp as the June air now biting my skin. A car roared past the church, its headlights slicing the dusk. I blinked, pulled back to the present. My legs moved before I decided, carrying me across the street to a diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and grease, the clink of dishes a steady rhythm. I slid into a booth, my reflection staring back from the window, hollow eyes, lines deeper than I remembered. The waitress, young with a tired smile, set a coffee in front of me. You're Laura's husband, right? She said, her voice gentle. She used to sit here, always with a book. My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to speak. Laura, here? Why hadn't she told me? The coffee sat untouched, steam curling into the air. I didn't want it. I didn't want anything. My eyes caught something on the next table, a newspaper, folded open, an ad circled in red ink. Storage auction, June 20th. Why would someone leave it like that? My hand reached for it, almost against my will, the paper crinkling under my fingers. It felt like a clue, though I didn't know why. I stuffed it in my pocket and stood, the diner's warmth suffocating now. Outside, the church loomed across the street, its steeple sharp against the sky. I started back, my steps heavy, the newspaper a weight against my chest. Then I saw him, the man in the coat, standing by the church doors. His eyes met mine, steady and unblinking, like he'd been waiting all along. My heart stuttered. He didn't move, but I felt it, the pull of whatever truth he carried. The church doors loomed before me, their oak weathered by years of Connecticut winters. I stood on the steps, my breath shallow, the newspaper from the diner still crumpled in my pocket. The stranger's gaze had burned into me, and now my fingers fumbled with the car keys, their jagged edges biting my palm. The air was thick, heavy with the promise of rain, and the evening sun painted the stone walls gold. Inside, the mourners' voices hummed, a low drone that felt miles away. I wanted to go back, to face him, but my feet wouldn't move. My chest tightened, like the world was closing in. Then I heard it, steps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the gravel behind me. A shadow stretched across the cobblestones, long and sharp, swallowing mine. I turned, heart pounding. There he was, the man in the dark coat, his fedora tilted low, silver hair catching the fading light. His eyes, cold and piercing, held me in place. He was closer than before, close enough for me to smell the faint leather of his coat. My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice barely a rasp. He didn't answer, just stepped nearer, his boots silent now. The churchyard was empty, the mourners inside, but a bird fluttered against a stained glass window, its wings a frantic tap against the glass. I glanced at it, then back at him. He was watching me, unblinking, like he knew every thought in my head. "Eric," he said, his voice low, a whisper that cut through the silence. "He crashed on his way to the funeral. You need to go to him. Now." The words hit like a fist, stealing my breath. "Eric. My son." I staggered, one hand grabbing the iron railing. "What?" I choked out. "How do you?" But he was already stepping back, his coat blending with the shadows of the church. "Hurry, Henry," he said, and his tone carried a weight I couldn't name, pity, maybe, or warning. I lunged forward, desperate to grab him, to demand more, but my foot caught the edge of a cobblestone. The keys slipped from my hand, clattering to the ground. "Henry!" Mary Green's voice called from the church doors, sharp with concern. I ignored her, scrambling for the keys, my fingers scraping the dirt. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out her cries. "Eric! An accident." I had to go. I snatched the keys and ran, my shoes slipping on the damp grass. The car was parked across the street, its windshield streaked with dust. I fumbled with the lock, cursing under my breath, and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life, too loud in the quiet evening. Mary shouted again, but I didn't look back. The church shrank in the rearview mirror, its steeple a dark spike against the sky. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. Eric's last call played in my mind 2 days ago, his voice clipped, distracted. "I'll be there, Dad," he'd said, but there was a pause, a hesitation I'd ignored. Why hadn't I pressed him? Why hadn't I asked what was wrong? The road blurred, my eyes stinging. I'd failed Laura, and now Eric, my boy, the only piece of her I had left. The stranger's words echoed, relentless. Crashed. Hurry. Who was he? How did he know? My foot pressed harder on the gas, the car lurching forward. I didn't care about the answers, not yet. I just needed to reach Eric. I fumbled for my phone, the screen cold against my fingers. No signal. I dialed anyway, the call dropping instantly. "Come on," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. The newspaper in my pocket crinkled as I shifted, and I pulled it out, almost without thinking. A scrap of paper fluttered free, landing on the passenger seat. Scrawled in black ink was an address, 16 Maple Lane. Not a hospital. Not even close. My stomach twisted. I stuffed it back in my pocket, the phone still clutched in my other hand. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, and I dialed Eric's number one more time, praying for a miracle. Rain lashed the windshield, a gray curtain that turned the highway into a smear of lights and shadows. The wipers screeched, their rhythm uneven, like a heartbeat out of sync. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the leather creaking under my hands. Eric's number glowed on my phone screen, but the call wouldn't connect, just endless beeps, then silence. I tried again, my thumb shaking as I pressed redial. Nothing. The road was a tunnel, swallowing me whole, and every mile felt like a betrayal. I was too late. I'd always been too late. The car smelled of spilled coffee, the cup long since tipped over in the center console. A photo of Eric, 5 years old, grinned at me from the sun visor, his gap-toothed smile, his hair wild from a day at the lake. I'd pinned it there years ago, a reminder of better days. Now it mocked me. The rain pounded harder, drowning out the radio's static. Headlights flickered in the distance, blurred by the storm. A sign flashed by a hospital, 10 miles. My foot pressed the gas, the engine growling. I didn't care about the speed limit. I didn't care about anything but him. Eric's face swam in my mind, not the boy in the photo, but the man he'd become distant, sharp-edged. I remembered a fight, years back, when he was 17. He'd wanted to skip college, chase some dream I didn't understand. "You never listen," he'd shouted, his voice cracking, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The front door slammed, its echo loud in the empty house. I'd stood there, silent, thinking he'd come back. He did, but not the same. I should have fought for him, should have asked what he needed. Instead, I let him drift, just like I'd let Laura slip away. My throat burned, the guilt a weight I couldn't shake. A horn blared, yanking me back. A truck swerved past, its lights blinding, the car shuddering as I jerked the wheel. My phone slipped, clattering under the seat. I cursed, reaching for it, my fingers brushing the carpet. The road curved sharply, and I yanked the car back into the lane, my heart hammering. I couldn't stop, not now. Eric was waiting, hurt, maybe dying. The stranger's voice rang in my head, low and urgent. "Crashed. Hurry." Why hadn't I asked his name? Why hadn't I demanded more? The questions gnawed me, but there was no time for answers. "Hold on, Eric," I said aloud, my voice ragged, barely mine. "Please, just hold on." The words hung in the air, unanswered, swallowed by the rain's roar. I imagined him replying, his voice calm, like when he was a kid, telling me about his day. But it was just me, alone, the storm my only companion. A hospital sign loomed closer, 5 miles. I pushed the car harder, the tires humming on the wet asphalt. I'd get there. I had to. Then I saw it, a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror, too close, unwavering. My pulse spiked. The car behind me didn't pass, didn't fall back. It followed, its lights cutting through the rain like eyes. I sped up, the needle creeping past 80. The car matched me, relentless. My hand drifted to my pocket, feeling the crumpled paper with the address 16 Maple Lane. It wasn't a coincidence, was it? The stranger, the paper, this car, they were connected. I didn't know how, but I felt it, a certainty that chilled me deeper than the rain. The hospital exit was ahead, its lights a faint glow. I floored the gas, the car behind me still there, waiting. The hospital doors hissed open, spitting me into a world of bleach and buzzing lights. I was soaked, my shoes squeaking on the tile, rain dripping from my coat. The lobby was chaos, nurses rushing, a phone ringing unanswered, someone crying in the corner. I pushed through, my voice hoarse as I demanded, "Eric Wilson. Where is he?" The receptionist flinched, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. "Intensive care," she said, pointing down a corridor. I didn't wait for more. My legs carried me forward, past gurneys and worried faces, the air sharp with disinfectant. Eric was here, somewhere, and I had to find him. Dr. Emily Carter met me at the ICU doors, her scrubs crisp, her eyes tired but steady. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice calm, too calm. "Eric's critical. Car accident. He's lost a lot of blood." The words landed like blows, each one heavier than the last. I grabbed her arm, not thinking. "Take mine," I said. "I'm his father. It'll match." She nodded, her expression unreadable, and led me to a side room. The needle stung, the vial filling red, but I didn't care. I'd give anything, everything, for him. The hospital was a maze of sounds, the beep of monitors, the clatter of a tray, the tick of a wall clock that seemed to mock me. It was too loud, that clock, counting seconds I couldn't afford to lose. I sat in a plastic chair, staring at a sign on the ICU door, "Eric Wilson. Room 3. My son's name, reduced to ink on a whiteboard. A coffee cup sat abandoned on the nurse's station, its steam long gone. I noticed everything, every pointless detail, because it was easier than thinking about what might happen next. My hands shook, still damp from the rain. I'd failed him. I'd failed Laura. The clock ticked on, relentless. An hour later, Dr. Carter returned, her face tight. "Mr. Wilson," she said, and something in her tone stopped my heart. "Your blood, it's not a match." I blinked, the words not sinking in. "What?" I said, my voice cracking. That's impossible. I'm his father. My legs buckled, and I grabbed the chair, its edge biting my palm. There's a mistake, I insisted, louder now, though I wasn't sure who I was convincing. She hesitated, her eyes softening. It's rare, but it happens, she said. We're looking for a donor. She turned away, her steps quick, leaving me with the weight of her words. Not a match. The phrase echoed, sharp and cruel. I sank into the chair, my mind reeling. Laura's face flashed before me, a memory, years ago, when Eric had a fever. She'd insisted on a private doctor, her voice firm, almost desperate. I'd thought it was just her worrying, but now. Had she known something? Had she hidden it? My stomach churned, a sickening doubt taking root. Eric, my son, how could he not be mine? I pressed my hands to my face, a hospital's hum fading to a dull roar. I didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it, but the question was there, clawing at me. Mr. Wilson? Dr. Carter's voice cut through, gentle but firm. We're doing everything we can. I looked up, my throat too tight to speak. How? I managed, the word barely a whisper. How is this possible? She paused, choosing her words. Sometimes, biology surprises us, she said, then hurried off, her clipboard clutched like a shield. I stared at the ICU doors, their frosted glass a wall between me and the truth. I wanted to barge in, to see Eric, to know he was still mine. But I couldn't move. Footsteps echoed down the hall, slow and heavy. I looked up, expecting the doctor, but my breath caught. A silhouette stood by the elevator, tall, unmistakable, the man in the dark coat. His hat was gone now, his silver hair stark under the fluorescent lights. He didn't move, just watched me, his eyes carrying a truth I wasn't ready to face. My heart stuttered, fear and anger twisting together. He was here. He'd followed me. And somehow, I knew he held the answers to everything. The hospital corridor stretched before me, its fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow that made my skin crawl. I stood frozen, my eyes locked on the ICU doors, their frosted glass hiding Eric from me. My hands were fists, nails digging into my palms, the pain a faint anchor against the chaos in my head. The stranger's silhouette lingered in my mind, his presence at the elevator a shadow I couldn't shake. Then I heard it, boots on tile, slow and deliberate. My head snapped up. There he was, stepping out of the elevator, his dark coat swaying like a storm cloud. Nathan Crow. His silver hair gleamed under the lights, but his eyes, those cold, knowing eyes, pinned me where I stood. Rage surged, hot and sharp, mixing with the fear I didn't want to name. I took a step toward him, my voice already forming a demand. The air smelled of antiseptic, sharp enough to sting my nose. A cracked tile caught my eye, a jagged line running under my shoe. Above the ICU doors, a light flickered, buzzing faintly, like it was struggling to stay alive. A wristband with Eric's name lay discarded on the nurse's station, its edges curling like a wilted leaf. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant beep of a monitor. It felt like the calm before a storm, and Nathan was the lightning about to strike. My chest tightened as he approached, his shadow stretching across the floor, swallowing the light. Dr. Emily Carter appeared, her clipboard clutched tight. Mr. Wilson, she said, her voice clipped but urgent. We've got a donor. He's here. She nodded toward Nathan, who stood calmly, his hands in his pockets. My stomach dropped. Him? I choked out, my voice raw. He's not, but she was already moving. Gesturing for Nathan to follow her to a donor room. He brushed past me, his coat grazing my arm, and I flinched, like I'd touched something dangerous. My legs moved before I could think, trailing them down the hall, the floor unsteady beneath me. A nurse pushed a cart past, its wheels squeaking, but I barely noticed. All I could see was Nathan, walking into that room like he belonged there. Inside, he sat, sleeve rolled up, a needle in his arm. Blood flowed into a clear bag, dark and steady. I stood in the doorway, my breath shallow, my hands shaking. Why are you here? I demanded, my voice louder than I meant. He looked up, his gaze steady, almost sad. I'm Eric's father, he said, each word deliberate, like a blade sliding into my chest. Laura was with me before you. He's mine. The room spun. I lunged forward, my fists clenched. You're lying, I shouted, my voice breaking. Get out. A nurse grabbed my arm, her grip firm, but Nathan just smiled, a small, bitter curve of his lips that made my blood boil. Ask yourself, Henry, he said softly. Why didn't her blood match either? He nodded toward the nurse, who was unhooking the needle, and I staggered back, the truth in his words a weight I couldn't carry. I stumbled into the corridor, my vision blurring. Laura's face flashed in my mind a night, years ago, when I'd found her crying in our bedroom. Her cheeks were wet, her hands clutching a pillow, but when I asked what was wrong, she shook her head, her voice a whisper. Just tired, she'd said. I'd let it go, like always. Now, I wondered. Had she been hiding him? Had she carried this secret all those years? My knees buckled, and I leaned against the wall, the cold tile grounding me. A monitor's beep pierced the silence, sharp and urgent, pulling me back. Eric was in there, fighting, and this man, this stranger, was part of him. I turned, my eyes catching the donor bag being carried toward the ICU. It was Nathan's blood, red and vital, heading to save my son. Or his son. I wanted to stop them, to rip the bag from the nurse's hands, but my feet wouldn't move. The operating room doors swung open, a doctor's voice calling for Dr. Carter. My heart lurched. Something was happening. I took a step, then another, drawn toward those doors, toward whatever truth waited on the other side. The waiting room was a cage, its walls closing in with every tick of the clock on the wall. I sat, hunched in a worn chair, my fingers crushing a plastic water cup until it cracked, the sound sharp in the quiet. Eric was in surgery, his life hanging on the skill of strangers and the blood of a man I despised. Each minute stretched, endless, the clock's hands mocking me with their slow crawl. My chest was tight, my breath shallow, like I was drowning in the stale air. Nathan's words echoed, relentless. I'm Eric's father. I didn't want to believe it, couldn't, but the doubt was a splinter, burrowing deeper with every second. The room smelled of burnt coffee and antiseptic, a mix that turned my stomach. Faded chairs lined the walls, their cushions sagging from years of worry. Outside the window, the parking lot shimmered under flickering streetlights, rain pooling in the cracks of the asphalt. A yellowed poster about blood donation hung crookedly, its edges curling. On the wall, a child's drawing a stick figure family under a bright sun caught my eye, and my throat burned. Eric used to draw like that, his crayons scattered across our kitchen table. I'd give anything to go back, to those days when he was mine, unquestioned. Footsteps broke the silence, soft but unmistakable. Mary Green appeared, clutching a canvas bag, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. Henry, she said, her voice trembling, I brought you some things. She held out a sandwich, wrapped in plastic, but I shook my head, my stomach too knotted to eat. She sat beside me, her hands fidgeting, and I let her stay, needing the distraction. How's Eric? She asked, her eyes searching mine. Still in surgery, I muttered, my voice flat. She nodded, her fingers twisting the bag's strap, and for a moment, we sat in silence, the clock's tick filling the space. Laura, Mary said suddenly. Her voice barely above a whisper. She had a hard life before you, you know? My head snapped up, my pulse quickening. What do you mean? I asked, sharper than I intended. She flinched, her eyes darting to the floor. Just, she carried a lot, she said, her words careful, like she was stepping around broken glass. Things she didn't share, even with me. I leaned closer, my voice low. Like what, Mary? Tell me. She shook her head, her lips tight. She needed peace, she said, almost to herself. We all do. I wanted to press, to demand answers, but her trembling hands stopped me. She was scared of what? I didn't know. My mind drifted to Laura, to a winter night when I'd seen her by the fireplace, feeding a letter to the flames. The paper curled, blackening, and she hadn't noticed me watching. I'd thought it was nothing, a bill or a note, but her face, tense, almost guilty, had stayed with me. Why hadn't I asked? Why had I let her secrets pile up, like dust in the corners of our home. A nurse hurried past, clutching a folder, and I blinked, pulled back to the present. The waiting room felt smaller, the air thicker. I needed Eric to be okay. I needed something to hold on to. Dr. Carter emerged, her scrubs wrinkled, her face tired but calm. "Mr. Wilson," she said, and I stood, the cracked cup falling to the floor. "The surgery went well. Eric's stable, but he's weak." Relief flooded me, so sharp it hurt, but it didn't last. I glanced at the window, catching a reflection, a car in the parking lot, its shape familiar, like the one that had tailed me on the highway. My stomach twisted. "Thank you," I told Dr. Carter, my voice distant. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, my steps quick. The rain had stopped, but the night felt heavy, watchful. I needed to see that car, to know if it was him. The house was a tomb, its silence louder than any sound. I stood in the living room, my shoes still damp from the hospital parking lot, my fingers brushing Laura's shawl, draped over the armchair. It smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, a scent that twisted my heart. The emptiness pressed against me, heavy, like the walls were breathing my grief. Outside, the garden she'd loved was a tangle of weeds, its roses choked by neglect. Moonlight spilled through the window, casting shadows that danced across the floor, and for a moment, I thought I saw her there, kneeling in the dirt. But it was just me, alone, with questions I couldn't answer. The air was thick with dust, the kind that settles when no one's left to care. A cracked vase sat on the mantel, its flowers long gone. Eric's photo grinned from a shelf, his teenage face frozen in a moment I couldn't reach. The clock on the wall was still, its hands stuck at midnight, like time had given up. I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling, Nathan's words a loop in my mind. "I'm Eric's father." The hospital had taken my DNA, promising answers, but waiting felt like sinking in quicksand. I needed truth, but I feared it more. I moved to Laura's desk, its drawers a Pandora's box I'd avoided for years. My fingers hesitated, then pulled one open, revealing a stack of letters, tied with a faded red ribbon. They were old, the paper yellowed, Laura's tight script covering the envelopes. My heart thudded. I lifted one, my thumb tracing her handwriting, but I couldn't bring myself to break the seal. What was I afraid of? That she'd loved someone else? That she'd lied all those years? I set the letter down, my breath uneven, and grabbed my keys instead. The church. Pastor James might know something, anything, to make sense of this. The drive was a blur, the town's lights smearing past like wet paint. The church loomed, its steeple sharp against the night sky, the stained glass windows dark now, hiding their colors. Inside, it smelled of wax and old wood, the pews empty except for Pastor James, arranging hymnals. "Henry," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "You look lost." I sat, the pew creaking under me, and asked, "Did Laura ever talk about her past? Before me?" His hands paused, his eyes soft but guarded. "She sought peace," he said, his tone too gentle, like he was soothing a child. "Like we all do." I pressed. My voice sharp. "Did she mention anyone else? A man?" He shook his head, his lips tight. "Let go of the anger, Henry. It won't help Eric." I stood, frustration boiling over. He didn't know, or he wouldn't say. I thought of Laura, locking her study door one evening, years ago. I'd knocked, heard the rustle of paper, but she hadn't answered. When she finally opened the door, her smile was forced, her hands empty. I hadn't pushed, hadn't demanded to know what she was hiding. Now, I wished I had. My phone buzzed, shattering the memory, the hospital. "Mr. Wilson," a nurse said, her voice clipped. "You should come. Eric's awake." My heart leapt, hope and fear colliding. I grabbed my keys, rushing for the door, but something caught my eye, a letter, fallen from my pocket, lying on the floor. Laura's handwriting stared up at me, my name scrawled across the envelope. I froze, the keys cold in my hand, but there was no time. Eric needed me. I left the letter where it was, the car's engine roaring as I sped toward the hospital, toward whatever came next. The hospital doors slid open, their hiss a quiet welcome after the night's chill. I stepped inside, my keys jangling in my pocket, their weight a nervous habit I couldn't shake. A week had passed since Eric's surgery, and the air felt lighter, like the world had exhaled. But my chest was tight, the DNA results looming like a storm on the horizon. Sunlight poured through the lobby's windows, painting the tiles gold, and for a moment, I let it warm me. Eric was awake. He was alive. That was enough, wasn't it? I wanted to believe it, but the crumpled letter from Laura, still unread in my pocket, whispered doubts I couldn't ignore. Eric's room was at the end of the hall, its door half open, letting out a soft hum of monitors. The scent of daisies hit me first. Someone had left a vase on the sill, their petals bright against the pale walls. I paused, taking in the scene, the rumpled blanket on Eric's bed, the four lines snaking from his arm, the hills beyond the window, green and endless. He looked small, his face pale, but when he saw me, he smiled, a real smile, not the forced ones from years past. My throat tightened. I pulled a chair close, the legs scraping the floor, and sat, my hands clumsy as I smoothed his blanket. "You need anything?" I asked, my voice rough. "Water," he said, his voice faint but warm. I grabbed a cup from the tray, grateful for something to do, something to bridge the gap between us. The room was quiet, save for the monitor's steady beep and the distant clatter of a nurse's cart. Sunlight spilled across the bed, catching the edge of Eric's bandage, and I noticed the way his fingers twitched, like he was reaching for something he couldn't name. I wanted to hold his hand, to tell him everything, but the words stuck. Instead, I watched him sip the water, his eyes meeting mine. "Dad," he said, hesitant, "I thought, maybe you didn't care." Back then. The words stung, sharp and true. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "I always cared," I said, my voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to show it. I want to fix that, Eric." "I will." He nodded, a small gesture, but it felt like a door opening, just a crack. I thought of him as a kid, sprawled on the living room floor, drawing houses with waxy crayons. One had a garden, like Laura's, with stick figure versions of us standing hand in hand. I'd laughed, tucking it away somewhere, but now I couldn't find it, and the loss ached. I should have kept it. I should have kept him closer. "You'll get through this," I said, more to myself than to him. His smile widened, faint but real, and I clung to it, a lifeline in the storm of my thoughts. A knock at the door broke the moment. Dr. Carter, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice steady, "we need to talk. The DNA results are ready." My heart lurched. I stood, my hand brushing the letter in my pocket, its edges worn from my constant touch. Eric watched me, his eyes curious but tired. "Go," he said, nodding toward the door. I wanted to stay, to hold on to this fragile piece, but the truth was waiting, and I couldn't run from it anymore. I followed Dr. Carter down the hall. The daisy scent fading behind me, the letter a quiet weight against my chest. The corridor stretched ahead, its lights too bright, and I wondered what I'd find at the end, relief, or another fracture in the life I'd built. Dr. Carter's office was a cramped box, its air heavy with the smell of paper and cooling coffee. I sat across from her, my hands clasped tight, the letter from Laura burning a hole in my pocket. The desk was a mess, pens scattered like fallen soldiers, a photo of her family propped against a mug. Outside, the parking lot was dim, its streetlights flickering as dawn crept in. My heart pounded, each beat a hammer against my ribs. She opened a folder, her face unreadable, and I braced myself, the silence thicker than the walls around us. The truth was here, inked on some sterile page, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. "You're Eric's father," she said finally, her voice calm, almost gentle. "The DNA confirms it." Relief crashed over me, so sharp I gasped, my eyes stinging with tears I hadn't expected. I was his father. Not Nathan. Me. I pressed my hands to my face, the weight of weeks, months, years lifting, if only for a moment. But the joy was fleeting, chased by a new question: why had Nathan lied? What did he want? I looked up, my voice unsteady. "Thank you," I said, and she nodded, her eyes soft but professional. "I'll let you process," she said, standing, and I stumbled out, the folder's words a lifeline I clutched in my mind. The corridor was quiet, its tiles gleaming under the morning light. I needed air, answers, something to ground me. I drove to the diner across from the church, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Inside, the clink of dishes and the smell of bacon wrapped around me, familiar, almost comforting. Mary Green sat in a corner booth, a cup of tea steaming in her hands. She looked up, startled, as I slid in across from her. "Henry," she said, her voice thin, "you look better." I didn't feel better, not entirely. "Mary," I said, leaning forward, "did Laura know Nathan? Before me?" Her fingers tightened on the cup, her eyes darting away. "They were close, once," she said, her words careful, like stepping over glass. "She didn't talk about it." "Not really." I pressed, my voice low. "What didn't she say?" She shook her head, her lips tight. "Some things stay buried, Henry. Let them." I wanted to argue, to demand more, but her trembling hand stopped me. I thought of Laura, years ago, mentioning a friend over dinner, her voice light but her eyes distant. I changed the subject, afraid of her mood, and now I cursed myself for it. Was that friend Nathan? Why had he come now, stirring up ghosts? My phone buzzed, pulling me back, a missed call, the number unknown. My stomach twisted. I stood, muttering a goodbye to Mary, and headed for the car, the diner's warmth fading behind me. The letter was still in my pocket, unopened, its weight a reminder of truths I hadn't faced. Outside, the morning was crisp, the sky a pale blue that promised clarity I didn't feel. I climbed into the car, my hands gripping the wheel, and noticed the letter had slipped onto the passenger seat, its edges frayed. Laura's handwriting stared up at me, my name a quiet accusation. The phone buzzed again, the same unknown number, and I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. Nathan's shadow loomed, not in the car but in my mind, his motives a puzzle I couldn't solve. I started the engine, the road stretching ahead, and drove toward the hospital, the letter beside me, waiting. The garden was alive, its air sharp with the scent of fresh earth and blooming roses. I knelt in the dirt, a spade in hand, planting daisies where Laura's weeds had once choked the soil. Morning dew clung to the grass, sparkling like tears that had finally dried. The sun was low, its warmth a gentle hand on my back, and for the first time in months, I felt steady, like the ground beneath me wouldn't shift. The letter from Laura sat unopened in the house, its secrets locked away, and I decided to let them stay there. Some truths didn't need to be spoken to be understood. I pressed the soil around a daisy, my fingers steady, and smiled, the ache in my chest softer now. Almost bearable. The house loomed behind me, its clapboard siding weathered but standing strong. Inside, it smelled of dust and memory, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. A bench by the roses, where Laura used to read, creaked under a breeze, and a butterfly settled on a petal, its wings a flicker of color. Birds sang, their notes weaving through the air, and I paused, listening, the spade still in my hand. The garden was hers, always would be, but it was mine now, too, a place to rebuild, to grow something new. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, and walked to the house, my steps light, the morning's promise settling into my bones. At the kitchen table, I pulled out a clean sheet of paper, the pen heavy in my hand. I wanted to write to Eric, to say what I hadn't in the hospital, what I'd failed to say for years. The words came slowly, each one a step toward him. I wasn't the father I should have been, but I'm learning. I want to be there, if you'll let me. My hand shook, but I kept going, the ink a bridge across the distance between us. I'm trying, Eric, I said aloud, my voice soft in the empty room, as if he could hear me. I'm not perfect, but I'm here. The words felt right, like a vow I could keep, and I folded the letter, slipping it into an envelope, his name scrawled in my uneven script. I thought of Nathan, his shadow lingering in my mind, but the anger was gone, replaced by a quiet indifference. He'd wanted something, redemption, revenge, maybe just to be seen, but it didn't matter anymore. Laura's voice echoed, a memory from a summer night, truth doesn't always set you free. She'd said it quietly, her eyes on the garden, and I hadn't understood then. Now, I did. Some doors were better left closed, some questions unanswered. I'd spent too long chasing ghosts, and I was done. Eric was my son, not because of blood, but because of the life we'd shared, the one we could still build. I stood, the envelope in hand, and walked to the front door, leaving it open behind me. The garden stretched before me, its colors vivid, the air sweet with possibility. I set the envelope on the bench, next to Laura's roses, and reached into my pocket, pulling out my keys. They glinted in the sunlight, heavy with the weight of the past. I placed them on the bench, beside the letter, and stepped back, the wind carrying the scent of daisies. The house stood open, its shadows soft, and I turned toward the garden, my hands empty, my heart full. Whatever came next, I was ready. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.